Nick, I feel like this is the kind of episode we should be shooting at our last location with the comic books on the wall.
You mean shooting? Like shooting?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't really have comics on the wall behind us here. I only have a few comics myself. Amazing Spider-Man, or Unlimited #1. Which
See, this is why we don't communicate. You should have told me. I got a bunch of Spider-Man comic books at home I could have brought. Yeah, some old-fashioned ones, too.
I got a reprint of Gwen Stacy's death. I know what I'm doing.
All right, maybe when we do Spider-Man like Homecoming or something.
There we go.
Yeah, so... today we're going to talk about actually one of the best Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, and I think one of the most unexpectedly great Spider-Man movies. Because I don't know about you, but I was not looking forward to this movie pretty much until I walked into the theater.
Yeah, it's one of those that it exceeds expectations because I thought, it's just an animated film and just I'm going to take the nephews and enjoy it. But actually, it's probably one of the best films of the year when it came out.
So we're going to talk superhero films. We're going to talk about maybe animated prejudices. And my super secret theory that Into the Spider-Verse is a secret sequel to Spider-Man 3 today on Kyle and Nick on Film. Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoetheFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and you know what's up. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your girlfriends, tell your boyfriends all about the show. You can follow us on Instagram, Kyle and Nick on Film. We're also on Twitter. Reach out to us that way. Also, good deals on Patreon. If you want to tell us what to do, be part of the team, check out some good deals on the Patreon. You can go as low as $1 a month, which is a little less than what I have for my coffee.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk about one of the surprise hits of 2018?
2017, I believe.
2017, kind of.
Yeah. 2019. Okay, or 20. I don't know. It's recent.
Pretty recent. Today, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Yes, we get our first look at Miles Morales, who is struggling to fit in at his new school. To further complicate matters, he's been bitten by a radioactive spider, as happens, and now he's the new Spider-Man. But Miles doesn't know how to be Spider-Man. So when he discovers several other spider people have been transported to his universe, Miles has to take the leap of faith and embrace his new powers and the fear that comes with. So before we get in too deep, I have to say this film is absolutely a in-universe sequel to Spider-Man 3. I know that by making Into the Spider-Verse, you can kind of make it a sequel to everything. Yeah. But this movie nods at the Spider-Man trilogy from Sam Raimi more than any other Spider-Man film franchise.
Yeah, if Sam Raimi made an animation film for Spider-Man, this would be kind of it.
Yeah, it's kind of got that lossless kind of insanity that a Sam Raimi movie has too.
Now, I would, even when I'm wearing a shirt, I would totally let you know, I'm a hardcore DC Comics fan. I love DC Comics. I decorate my podcast studio around DC Comics. So anybody takes a picture, they will know that I love DC Comics. But one of the things that DC Comics does not get right, that Marvel always win, is tone doesn't have to match theme. You can have a dark, dreary tone, but the theme can be uplifting. For some reason, DC films always have to have a tone and theme have to match. And that doesn't really have to be that way. You can have a really deep, dark message, what this movie does, but it has fun in it, and it's whimsical, and it's charming at the same time.
Yeah, it seems like DC tends to, and we're not going to hate on DC at all because I enjoy most of the DCEU, most of the DC films, quite a bit of the Marvel movies as well. We're kind of fanboys of both.
I'm taking criticism like it's a negative.
But that's the thing kind of about DC is that like they tend to say dark is a type of movie. Like we make a dark movie as if that's kind of the focus. And they're kind of like falling out of that now. I think the leadership making the movies over there.
Shazam's,
we talked about Birds of Prey, which I've watched a few more times since that happened, and I've grown to respect. They're kind of leaning out of that, but it's something where it's kind of a special idea to have these Marvel properties not entirely owned by Disney still. Like having Spider-Man owned by Sony. This is not a Spider-Man movie you would have gotten under Disney. No. And it's kind of like having like the Hulk still owned by Universal kind of. Like it's kind of nice to still have a little bit spread out. Because as we start to get now the X-Men films and the Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four, Sony. Yeah. And Spider-Man was owned by Sony, which is a lot of the problems of Marvel Studios and the whole mix. And if you want to go further, there's a lot of publications about it. The other thing about DC is always catching up to Marvel's opportunity. Marvel always risks and gambles of new things, and DC's always been trying to catch up, which is why Marvel's going to make a whole linear sequence of movies that all tie in together. Well, DC's like, well, let's do that. That doesn't really work very well. They're always continually trying to catch up on how to make comics to Marvel. Here with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, it's kind of the same. It's been played out in the comic books of Interverse, and it's nice to see it that it's played out into the film. I know one of the great stories of Spider-Man is the Clone Wars.
Yes.
And we're probably going to get a version of that movie on live shot with probably yeah. It's probably an open secret around Hollywood that the Clone Wars is going to be probably part of the new Spider-Man movie. But going back to Into the Spider-Verse.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you pointed out, DC's always kind of been behind Marvel in this case. This is actually an area, though, where I think DC has been ahead of Marvel for so long. Animation? DC consistently makes good animation films.
Yeah, they do.
I will go out and buy a DC animated movie not having seen it because I expect greatness. And so often they do hit that level of greatness. And they're able to experiment because they embrace that multiverse kind of style that we get Batman Year of the Dragon, a 70s set martial arts.
If you've seen that, then that is
or we get like Batman Hush. We get, Gotham by Gaslight. Like they've been embracing that so much. This is kind of one of those things where, again, like because you're embracing your multiverse in Spider-Man, everything in Spider-Man is kind of canon. But everything is also not canon. It's kind of like Cabin in the Woods to horror movies, where it's just like you're kind of like elevating.
You're stuck in the stationary.
Exactly, yeah.
But with Spider-Man, it's prevalent for a present day. It's always evolving. It's not stationary like a Batman. Batman's story is always going to stick the same. Spider-Man's always going to be prevalent to the present day. And how do you do that? Well, you keep changing. You keep adapting. Peter Parker, it's new Spider-Mans, different Spider-Mans. So that's where it's most effective is it's present day and relates to present day kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, I was really concerned about. I was pushing for a Miles Morales Spider-Man for a while.
He's been out for many years.
And when they were initially casting for Homecoming, I was like, hey, like before we'd seen Tom Holland picked to be in Civil War and such, I was like, let's get a Miles Morales in there. We've seen 2 different versions of Peter Parker already, and 2 different. I would say the characters are successful, even if their final movies weren't as much so. So I was kind of pushing for a Miles Morales version. I felt like, oh my gosh, they're relegating like the first non-white Spider-Man to an animated movie because I thought it was gonna be a little bit cheaper to make. I thought they were gonna be able to kind of take advantage of this a little bit more. And I was blown away when I saw the finished film because I would say that Miles Morales maybe has kind of the coolest of the Spider-Man films, being in animation like that, because let's talk about the animation a little bit. It was one of the most unique films ever made because it's 3D animation colored over with 2D animation, which is, kind of similar to Almost American Pop where they did the rotoscoping. This was like creating a 3D and then overlaying it with 2D.
Right, so there's a multiple layer. It looks very glossy, very sleek. And I have to say about art, I always tell the students, exaggerate your characters, exaggerate your art form. And they did a marvelous job of exaggerating everything, including the villains, including Kingpin. That's an exaggeration to the point of, that's the villain, all right. Yeah. And of course, a little bit of surprise increments. The little tropes of like, you think you know what's going to happen, and it doesn't. Constantly.
That's the beauty, is they set you up at the very beginning that we don't have a Coca-Cola. It's like something else kind of cola that's in the front. Yeah. So we know that we're not in our Earth. And that's kind of the beauty again about having like a Peter Parker and referencing Spider-Man, is that they show us that while this is kind of in universe with that, it's also its own thing. Like he punches the car in the flashback to Spider-Man 2. When he's doing the dance, he's still wearing the blue and red suit instead of the black suit. So they're kind of like showing at the very beginning that we're not in the same universe. And then I also like that too, like when you have your reveal of, small spoiler, Olivia Octavius.
Yeah, Catherine.
Female, like Otto Octavius. I thought that was a fantastic idea because then we got a great Otto Octavius in Spider-Man 2. We don't need the exact same thing again. Let's try something different, and we got that here.
Catherine Hahn, right?
Catherine Hahn.
Yeah. Do you want to cast somebody that's going to exaggerate your characters and go out and not be fearless? Catherine Hahn's the way to do it. Yeah, it's perfect. And it doesn't seem, none of it seems flashy, but being flashy.
Yeah, and that comes with having, again, like starting with Peter Parker, and you start with a guy that's always kind of enigmatic and a little bit. And with the Peter Parker we get, he talks about he did a Christmas album. He made a popsicle. Like he's poking fun at himself because that's kind of always been the style of a Peter Parker. Is he never really takes the situation seriously unless he's forced to.
Well, now he is, right? I'm growing up with Spider-Man. Again, he's always had fun taking on the bad guys and on them and cracking jokes to the point where it frustrates Doc Ock by making fun of him, and Doc Ock knows he's being a kid. But we get a Peter Parker that's almost kind of tired of it.
Yeah, we get to see the reverse of that because every time they reboot Spider-Man, they make him as young as they possibly can. I mean, this most recent one, this Tom Holland one, that we start him in freshman. Like the whole idea with those series was supposed to be a freshman movie, a sophomore movie, a junior, and a senior.
Right,
like we were supposed to get that series. So we're back in high school again, and it's nice to see a Peter that is embracing the 40s. You know, like he's embracing his time, and things have not gone well. He's lost his aunt now. Yeah. He's had to he's had to end his marriage. And things just have not been going the way that he wants. Yeah, I mean, he's crying in the shower wearing a Spider-Man suit. So the Peter B. Parker that we get is a really interesting idea because we also get classic Spider-Man, 26-year-old Spider-Man, voiced by Chris Pine in a cameo at the beginning of the film. So I think both Jake Johnson as the 40-year-old Peter B. Parker and Chris Pine as the regular Peter Parker are really kind of fun to watch how different they are because of the years and the mileage.
One of the tropes of Spider-Man, although it is prevalent and always constantly evolving, is a little bit surreal. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of surrealism with characters and a little bit of surreal environment, even though it's kind of grounded and centered. But you have a lot of play with almost a surreal art form of him going, like Mysterio or something like that, or Doc Ock. And here we have a spectrum that there's many different versions of Spider-Man. Yeah. And you play with it all. You can be a little bit serious, and that's fun, like the noir with Nick Cage. He's supposed to be serious, but you kind of get a smirk at it. Mm-hmm. And of course you get Spider-Pig from the Simpsons movie.
Yeah, Peter Porker, which does have his own comic book. It was limited, I think, but it did exist. I mean, and Peter Porker was funny because he was such a breath of fresh air and oddity in the franchise. Yeah. And he went as far as he actually got his own short film that followed what happened to him before he got sent to our Earth.
That's true.
Which I did watch this morning as well. John Mulaney plays Peter Porker, and again, he does a great job of not overdoing it. And that's a tough thing to do when you have a talking sentient pig that's also a spider.
There's a little bit of surrealism to this whole aspect, right? Yeah, because you pitch it to him, Jay, John, I'm going to be Spider-Pig, I want to go wild. No, we want you to kind of...
Yeah, and it'd
be underwhelming
really
almost.
Tough to do.
Right, be underwhelming.
And looking at these different characters too, Nick, you again, I was worried that they were going to just destroy the Miles Morales story by making him a small part of a bunch of Spider-Men. You know, I was like, you're going to take Miles Morales in his first outing, and you're going to weigh him down with two Peter Parkers. We have a Penny Parker, we have Spider-Man Noir, we have Peter Porker, we have Spider-Gwen, we have all these other Spider people in the movie that are going to kind of take away from his story. And what's amazing is how that doesn't happen. How this is very much Miles' story. And if you eliminated everybody but the other Peter Parker as his kind of mentor, you could still kind of have the same story going on throughout the film. They're just added flavor.
I actually agree. This could have been very convoluted and a mess. But
especially in the world of Spider-Man, everything's convoluted with those sequels.
But it has a little bit of clarity and continue to follow that it's understand and it's clear, even though it has opportunities to muck it up and be really congested. Mm-hmm. But here, with clever writing, you're able to navigate a little more clarity. I've written a lot of convoluted scripts, and clarity is hard to, when you want to throw everything out there, but still do it, but has a sense that we're also grounded as well.
Well, you don't want to make the audience feel dumb for either going above their heads or going too low.
No, it constantly hits that mark
there. Yeah. And especially when you have something like a super collider and alternate universes of Spider-Man, that's a lot of mucky muck that could really overdo and destroy your narrative. Yeah. And I find that it's never once dumbed down, but it's always accessible. And whereas again with Miles Morales, I would argue that most people who haven't read a comic book probably didn't know that there was another Spider-Man, or that there have been multiple Spider-Man in the past.
Yes.
So getting Miles Morales, I think, was less of a concern about that and more like, okay, we have a different character. Anyone who's watched only Spider-Man movies only knows Peter Parker. So giving him kind of the brunt of the action, making him our forward-moving character, and then giving him an accessible storyline, like he's just having trouble at his new school. He's too smart, but everyone around him is going to judge him for that. So he chooses to do that true-false test at the beginning, where he does the exact opposite on the two answers.
Yes.
Just because he doesn't want to appear smart. And it's that's a self-destructive tendency that I think we can kind of
plays on Spider-Man, right?
Yeah,
it does. And then how do you promote yourself without trying to sell yourself, right? How do you get your self out there? And not only do you have these powers, and how can it benefit from it, rather than sometimes just saving the world also. I love the whole sequence of the female Doc Ock out in the woods.
Oh, in the woods, yeah.
Because that's not only just a good idea, but it's edited properly. It's almost like a Spielberg chase. how they did it.
And the beautiful thing again about doing that with animation is you can go a little larger. Like if you really watch that sequence, that woods is like 3 cities long. Like they keep going with it, but again, you can kind of have fun with unreality a little bit. It's a very nicely edited sequence. It's also, when you think about superhero movies, you don't think that there's going to be a fight in the forest. Like that's again like
well,
it's
like Spider-Man, you expect it to be in the street, right?
Yeah, you expect it to be in the streets. So when it gets to that kind of an area too, and it embraces snow, and it embraces all these different kind of visual elements outside, it's unique because it's kind of, again, it's kind of should be dull. It should be dull to have a fight in the forest over this computer parts.
I like each and every act of this movie. First act, second act, and third act, with slowly building up and then taking its time and deflate, depress, because it's a lot of anxiety as well. You get a lot of the reveals, the twists and turns. It could have gone way off at the end, but each is properly structured. I know exactly when Act 2 starts. I know exactly where Act 3 starts, and I know where they're kind of building up, but I want to get there on my own pace.
Yeah, and it's nice to have, by 15 minutes into the movie, you know pretty much everything you need to know to just be able to access and just kind of like live in the world for a bit. Yeah. I love that, like I said, with all of these spider people that we were promised in the trailer, I love that we don't get any of them, any of the excessive ones until an hour into the movie. We don't get Penny Parker or Spider-Man Noir or Peter Porker or
Gwen Stacy.
Yeah, Gwen Stacy starts to come in in that 40-minute mark where it's like, okay, so we have one now, it's going to slowly give them to us.
She's had her own comic book too.
Oh yeah, I was a fan of the Spider-Gwen comic, so I was excited to see this version of her kind of come to the big screen, because again, if you think it was tough to get Miles Morales to the big screen, if they had not done this movie, you would never be getting a Spider-Gwen movie.
Yeah,
it would just be too far out there,
Right, it would seem a little more. But now that you've broken the ice and got this out there, you can expand to different little things and have fun with it. We've also, in our previous episode, talked about Mandy with Nick Cage, and this is typically the third film of that year that Nick Cage did, when it did a home run. Nick Cage is also well known to be a comic book fan. He did Ghost Rider. He also was going to do Superman.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't take Kick-Ass as well. He's playing Batman at Kick-Ass, to be honest with you. But it doesn't take very much if you want to be a noir guy in Spider-Man. I don't think it would take very much to say no to that.
Well, and what's great about it, too, is that, again, you're putting Nick Cage as Spider-Man Noir, and you're not forcing him. He's very, he only gets a couple of lines, really. He's not a big character in the movie.
There's no, winking at the camera, he's really believing.
But you're right. That year we had Mandy. We had Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. We had Mom and Dad, which is an underrated horror movie where he played, a dad who decided to kill his children.
That's one of those things that's unforgettable.
And then we also had his cameo appearance in the Teen Titans Let's Go to the Movies, where he played Superman. So in 1 year, he had 4 pretty solid movies that kind of made me think that maybe we're in the middle of a Cage-a-sance here.
Maybe it's not Spider-Man, it's Cage first. We're living out Cage out. Right, yeah. So it doesn't take much to get him into doing a superhero movie. We got also director.
So we had 3 directors on the film. We had Bob Persichetti, we had Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman.
This is another thing.
I only knew about Peter Ramsey, who had done Rise of the Guardians. I was not aware of the other 2.
This is why we're bringing it up, because it's another way that this movie could have gone off. When you see something that has 3 directors, it's going to be a convoluted mess, and you got so many characters, it's going to be a convoluted mess. But here they constantly, I think they already knew they would all work together. It's kind of broken it up a little bit.
I think it was an element of that. I think there was 2 originally, and then they had brought in a third who had a little bit more expertise with kind of playing with the form of animation. Yeah. But it was, again, 3 directors, and that you can get more directors on an animated film, and it's not usually a death sentence, but it is something to be 3 of them. Okay, hopefully there's a singular vision. Then you also have Phil Lord, who wrote the screenplay with Rodney Rothman, and this was coming off of Phil Lord and Chris Miller being, unceremoniously exiting the Solo movie several months before too. So you're kind of not sure where are they at with the Spider-Man movie, because they were kind of let go for making too campy of a Solo movie from what we hear. So what are they going to do with a Spider-Man movie? And so when you get Phil Lord writing on that too, he's another singular vision. So that's 4 big cooks in the kitchen.
We also talked about this should not have worked.
Yeah.
You have 3 directors, you have 2 writers, you have
30 Spider-Men.
30 Spider-Men, you're going off, you're not having Peter Parker as the lead Spider-Man. All of it should not have worked, and it does. It does. And it's fun. That's what I wonder. It is fun to watch,
Mm-hmm.
even when the tone is kind of dark. It's still fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the last, appearances of Stan Lee in a film. I think he did Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame next, but then he was pretty much out of the picture. In fact, if you watch the film, Stan Lee is on pretty much every single train in New York. The animators didn't want to just animate him once, so they put him on every train. And I think that's kind of a cool little thing as well.
Multiple Stanleys on a train.
Exactly, yeah. So that's there's your Snakes on a Plane spinoff. We should have gotten Stanleys on a train, but but I think what's so great is it's a love letter to the comic style of how to create a movie. And again, I would argue that maybe it takes about 5 minutes for your eyes to adjust. It's kind of like watching the Hobbit movies when they had that red camera, where it's like your mind needs to kind of just adjust because you're eating like Pop Rocks in movie form here. Like it's on the screen, it's blasting out at you. I like that when we have the opening titles, we get like 40 different versions of Columbia Pictures because that kind of preps you for what you're about to see. Yeah.
I knew it was going to be a good movie because my nephew was 8 years, probably I think he was 8 years old, and he could not sit down the entire time in the theater watching this. And thank God we're in the last row, so go ahead and stand up, kid, if you want to enjoy this movie.
See, I was in the third row and I was standing up, so I was the problem there.
I want to go in that universe.
Because again, I expected so little, and again, it's not a detriment. I have kind of an animation bias, I feel. Whereas, like, if I'm given a story that I think can be done live action, I would rather see it done live action.
I would love to see a Mandy animation.
See, but I've already got my live action then, so I can settle for it. But if you gave me a Mandy live action or a Mandy animated, I would pick the live action one because I just prefer that live action flavor if you can do it right. And I think Spider-Man, you can do it right. And I've also seen Marvel films like the Hulk versus movies, those Ultimate Avengers movies, the straight to DVD stuff where it's like they didn't really care. There's never been a really great Marvel animated movie until now. I would even argue
there's
that
snippets,
there's bits and pieces, or there's movies that look pretty but don't, or things that don't work as well. Like I think the Marvel animes that they did for like X-Men, really cool looking anime, but the story just went nowhere for me. So it's kind of like there's never been that element of a really great Marvel animated movie until this one, and it's not even a Disney one.
Have you seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse?
Yeah.
Or you're in a dimension that hasn't seen it yet?
Yeah, perhaps. Or maybe you're in a dimension where they've seen the sequel already. And
beginning
not
the sequel.
Original. So we've got a sequel coming on. Real quick, Nick, have you any thoughts for what you'd like to see in a sequel to this film?
A little more flavor with Clone Wars.
Okay.
If you're going to do convoluted, or maybe you want to dial it back now. Usually, part 2, you want to amplify and just go bigger, badder explosions, but maybe you want to dial it down and a little bit. I don't know.
See, I would like to see an element.
Take some risks.
Miles going to the other universes. Because they hint at that a little bit right at the end of the film where like the universe is opening and they're visiting with him. They figured out a way to kind of like cross over. Sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the film. And then, of course, hinting at that with the post-credits scene of Spider-Man 2099 with Oscar Isaac.
Yeah.
Like, there's a hint that we might see some different variations. I don't just want to have the same movie but different Spider-Man or more of them, but I would like to see something where maybe Miles is hopping through a few different, like a search, kind of like a holy grail search, if you will, of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But we're always open for the idea of it. But let us know your thoughts on the film. Is this your favorite Spider-Man movie? Because I know some people that actually say it's their favorite Spider-Man movie, and I can't find a fault with that. Or is it absolutely your least favorite Spider-Man movie? Do you think that they should cross this version of the character over with the MCU one? Because there's been a weird talk about that before. Let us know your comments down below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video if you can, and check out that Patreon as well. Like Nick said, tiers as low as $1. It's half a cup of coffee, or in this world, sometimes a quarter cup of coffee. Maybe your universe is cheaper. But let us know all that stuff, and thank you for joining us. Once again, my name is Kyle Goethe, and you can find all my film reviews on GoFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, so I'll see you later.
Go Web, go.